Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. After an extremely long gap because of the pandemic, the monsoon session of the Parliament begins from the 14th of September and goes all the way till the 1st of October. There are several burning issues at hand which seem quite obvious at this point. The economy for one, the Indo-China situation, and of course, several others, including what's happening between states and centers in terms of a threat to federalism. However, this session looks like it's going to be quite different in form and precedent as the members of parliament get ready to congregate after an extremely long hiatus. Joining me to talk about all of that is Member of Parliament Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who's also head of the Parliamentary Committee on Information Technology. Thank you very much for joining in, Dr. Tharoor. After a long gap, we will have a parliament session. Before I address some of the key issues that might come up for consideration, I want to talk about what seems like an odd departure from norm, which is to curtail and cancel the 0 hour and question hour. Is there a precedent to this?
Well, no. As far as I'm aware, no. I'm told that even during some of our wars, this went ahead. But I can't claim to be a total authority on this. Certainly, in the memory of myself and those working around me, we're not aware of any precedent. There may have been, if a special emergency session was ever convened on a particular issue, that would have been a possible reason to suspend question hour or 0 hour, but never in a regular session. This is a regular session of Parliament. It is the monsoon session, belatedly, though the monsoon is almost over. And in such a session, budget session, monsoon session, winter session, there never should be cancellation of something as basic as question hour and 0 hour.
Was there any consultation of any sort held before this communication was sent out, Dr. Tharoor? And do you think it will be open for discussion when Parliament convenes?
Well, my understanding is that the minister claims to have consulted opposition leaders, which would be the so-called floor leaders. Well, the Congress party floor leader is Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary, who said that he had objected strenuously and subsequently in writing to this idea. Whether other floor leaders agreed, I don't know. But since Congress is the principal opposition party, one would have assumed that they would have had some respect for our concerns in this area. Certainly, when I heard of this, I immediately reacted. I noticed that so did the Trinamool Congress's Derek O'Brien, who reacted equally vehemently, and as soon as the decision was announced. So I don't think it's entirely fair to suggest that opposition parties were having second thoughts. I think that many opposition MPs, had they been asked, would have said this is a lousy idea. And the logic defies all rationality, because the government seems to be saying, listen, as far as we're concerned, the problem is that we don't have enough hours, even working 7 days a week, because we have to divide mornings for one house, afternoons for another house. Therefore, we will not have enough time to fulfill the full agenda. That's their rationale. But if you do the maths, in the old days, we used to work 6 hour sessions 5 days a week, which is 30 hours a week. Today, we've got 7 days of 4 hour sessions, which is 28 hours a week. Why would you need to cut 5 hours of question hour and 5 hours of 0 hour to make up for 2 hours lost? You could just have one bill less, you know. I mean, it's really quite odd. I find that the rationale is very specious, and more important, by replacing question hour with written answers, which is what the government has done. They have essentially said that they are willing to answer questions in a rehearsed way prepared by bureaucrats, but for ministers to give unscripted answers, they're not prepared. Now, that's a pretty shameful confession by the government, because the only opportunity to question ministers, catch them off guard, have them give unscripted answers is during question hour. Because otherwise they can give a very prepared speeches and prepared for them by their staffs and their bureaucrats. We find that you're knocking the oxygen out of democracy if you stop unscripted answers in question hour.
Hmm. How do you respond to the criticism, though, Dr. Tharoor, that has been, thrown up by some parties, which is that this particular hour was wasted by the opposition? There wasn't enough debate that was conducted. Instead, it was a bit of a rabble-rousing moment for many members of the opposition.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I actually I find it was a shame when that happened, and everyone knows that I have conscientiously objected to disruptions throughout my parliamentary career, and I've never joined in a disruption myself. I think this was a nasty habit started by the BJP when UPA was in power. Up till then, there was still some civilized modicum of discourse in Parliament. But once the BJP started disrupting the House, I'm afraid other opposition parties have leapt onto the bandwagon when they came into opposition. So I remember how we reacted, all of us in the UPA, to horror, when Arun Jaitley, the late and much lamented Arun Jaitley, argued in a very learned piece that disruption was a legitimate form of parliamentary conduct. I thought it was misconduct rather than conduct. But anyway, when UPA started doing it, I pointed out that we had objected when they did it. Why are we doing it? But I realized that unfortunately, there is an element of theatre to some of Parliament. People want to use the stage of Parliament to display the intensity of their feelings on some things to the general public through television. In other words, to disrupt the proceedings rather than debate the issues is too often seen as what conveys people's feelings to Parliament. I do object, I disagree. I think that we should be using question hour not to disrupt but to embarrass the government. If necessary, disrupt something else. I'm not in favor of disruption for any reason at any time.
One hopes that the primary issue of agenda or issue of debate and discussion will be the situation with the economy, Dr. Tharoor. We've only just looked at the Q1 GDP figures, and from all likelihood, it looks like the entire year is going to be as difficult. What do you think will be the prime questions or the prime issues of consideration regarding the economy? And more importantly, what can be done to fix the situation?
Right. Well, as far as the main questions are concerned, number one, to point out that what happened during the COVID issue was unfortunately merely an acceleration of trends that had been apparent during the BJP's stewardship of the economy in the preceding years, particularly starting with demonetization, which, as Dr. Manmohan Singh pointed out at the time, had given a 2% knock to the economy. And after that, we never properly recovered, and it kept sliding downhill. That's one major issue, the complete mismanagement of the economy. Linked to that is the complete absence of a fiscal stimulus. We are very, very unhappy that the Prime Minister sought to mislead the nation by suggesting that there was a 20 lakh crore fiscal stimulus that would actually be a significant percentage of the GDP, when in fact studies indicate that it was actually less than 1% of the GDP in new money that was coming in. Third, unemployment. If you look at unemployment even before COVID, we were lamenting the fact that we had the worst unemployment figures in 45 years. Today with COVID, we have the worst unemployment figures in the country ever. And all sectors have been hit. Daily wage workers have been hit, but salaried professionals have been hit. 21 million salaried jobs have been lost between April and August, according to the Center for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy. So we are looking at a calamity going on in the country at the moment. And in these circumstances, we have absolutely no choice but to challenge the government and ask them to tell us what they're doing about it. The Parliament session becomes, frankly, an exercise in trying to revive the economy. And as far as revival is concerned, we had suggested a real fiscal stimulus. We had suggested very specific measures on employment. And finally, the fourth and last point I want to make amongst the big points of the economy is the micro, small and medium enterprises sector. The MSMEs are really hurting. And it seems to me criminal that the government failed to heed any of our concerns on MSMEs. I just want to say that for many of us in the Congress party, there are two obvious and easy wins available. One was to grant immediate relief to MSMEs. And one way the government can do this is by deferring 50% of their GST dues for 3 years, which can be paid back in installments over 5 years. We're not saying forego the money. We're saying give them time to recover and pay back.
Yeah.
and if necessary, make a budget allocation just to tide over that period. Say, give them 5 years to pay back the 50% of their dues that are actually deferred.
Yeah.
And the second thing we've said is that rather than cutting spending in a time of crisis, the central government and central public sector enterprises should be stepping up public procurement from MSMEs. So when MSMEs are facing a drying up of demand for their products and services, particularly those vulnerable ones run by SC/ST members of our society, the government should be keeping them afloat by buying their products rather than cutting spending, cutting procurement. And of course, the government is not even filling up jobs in the central government. We want every single job filled. So all of these things, we believe, are measures the government could take. And, you know, when you give people jobs, when you buy their products, you automatically kickstart the economy. People are spending money in their hands. They go out and buy more goods other than the ones that they're selling to you, and they then add to aggregate demand. So there's tremendous possibilities that the government is just sitting on its hands and doing nothing about, and we don't understand it.
I want to focus specifically on the GST issue, Dr. Tharoor, because this involves many states. It also involves the concept of federalism, and many of the states are actually in far worse condition economically than the center itself. It looks like discussions in the GST Council are not going well. There are very, very polar opposite points of view. Can the parliament be a mobilizing factor to resolve this? Because many of those states are Congress-led states and they will be impacted by this decision.
Well, we can discuss it, but unfortunately, this government seems to be impervious to the siren call of federalism. From their point of view, anything that involves changing their mind would mean they're spending money that they don't want to spend on the states. You know, we've said, why can't you, the central government, borrow instead of asking the states to borrow? Because you can borrow at a lower rate of interest. Yeah. And you would be in a position, you being the central government, to be able to then allocate that money. It's not that the states are refusing to pay it back, but their idea would be that they would actually get the funds more easily and affordably than if they were asked to borrow, where they'd have to go out into an absolutely tough market and try and find the money. Unfortunately, our central government is completely impervious. And by the way, it's not only Congress governments that have made this demand. I can assure you, for example, that the government to which this Congress is in opposition in Kerala, led by the CPM, has made the same demand as well. And I have to say that it's a very reasonable demand, because what they're saying essentially is, you help us. You know, we all in this together, you say, we have a problem. And why can't you help us by making it easier for us? For example, saying that the state should resort to borrowing to cover the shortfall in the GST compensation cess is completely unreasonable, because they're saying that the central government's position is this should be only paid from the compensation fund, and it's not the government's obligation at all to finance the shortfall, which goes right against the letter and the spirit of the very constitutional amendment that gave us the GST, because you remember that involved the states giving up their constitutional right to levy certain taxes in favor of the central government, and at the same time, the previous GST, when Arun Jaitley was finance minister, never took such a stand. So how can they now go around and essentially welch on commitments that they have solemnly made in the original bill, in the original understanding in the Constitution, and further in their discussions in the 7th, 8th, and 10th meetings of the GST Council, when all of this was actually discussed?
The second major point of consultation or conversation, one hopes, Dr. Tharoor, is the situation with our neighbors, the Indo-China dispute. Today, we have a comment from the foreign minister saying that both foreign ministers are speaking of de-escalation, while also speaking of, how they are against the massing of Chinese troops along the LAC. I want to ask you, sir, in the past couple of weeks or months, has there been any all-party meeting? Has there been any briefing in which members of the opposition or other parties have even been apprised of the situation? And how much do you think will get discussed within the parliament session on what looks like an extremely serious situation?
Well, first of all, the Chinese are acting and publicly stating that their part of disengagement is over. There's nothing more to disengage. When they say we should de-escalate, they mean the Indians should pull back. So there is a clear problem that the two countries are not on the same page, even on disengagement and de-escalation. So while first of all, I think we demand and expect a briefing by the foreign minister in Parliament. He can't sort of be in Moscow, issue a very bland press release and not expect to come back and be answerable to the parliament to which his government is accountable. So first thing we want is a proper briefing from the defense minister on what actually happened on the border and is happening, and from the foreign minister on what negotiations have taken place and what's in prospect. So this is reasonable for us to expect. It's standard practice in every parliamentary democracy that parliament is taken into confidence. We are all proud, patriotic Indians. We're not interested in embarrassing the government for the sake of embarrassment. We're not choosing to score political points. We want to know, what are you doing to keep our country safe? The real issue is very simply this. We have read a lot of reports, disquieting reports since May of this year, of Chinese encroachments on the LAC. We are told that over 900 square kilometers of territory which we used to patrol are now no longer available for patrolling. We have been told that we should actually take at face value the Prime Minister's astonishing statement that nobody has entered our territory, and that the Chinese are not in possession of any territory that we used to hold, when in fact we have been unable to patrol in areas we used to patrol for many, many years before, and the Chinese are apparently sitting with permanent and enduring structures in areas which Indian soldiers used to routinely patrol before. So in these circumstances, we are facing a genuine crisis and a genuine problem. And I think that the government needs to take the Indian people into confidence, give us the reassurance that they know what they're doing, what's in hand. We're not asking for any state secrets, but certainly they need to walk back from the claim, which can easily be belied by any satellite photographs, that there is no change in the situation. There is obviously a demand on India's part to return to the status quo ante. And the reason there is such a demand is precisely because there is a need for it.
Is this on the agenda for the opposition party? Will this be tabled within the first week of Parliament session reopening, Dr.
Oh, definitely. I have no doubt that many parties, certainly the Congress, will give a notice on this. And what is more, as far as the terrible situation on the economy is concerned, I have no doubt that many parties have already given a notice on this. So these are questions on which every MP wants to see discussion. We'd also want to see discussion on the mismanagement of the pandemic, because after all, we are now the second worst affected country in the world. And this is not something that we can take lightly, given the statements made at the very beginning of the crisis by the Prime Minister and the Health Minister that there was nothing to worry about. When you've got 900,000 people affected, I'm sorry, that's around the world. You've got 4.2 million people infected in India, 4.4, I beg your pardon, the figure goes up every day. 4.4 million people affected in India, and at the same time, the number of fatalities increasing as well, even though the fatalities are fortunately relatively small as a percentage, that's still a large number of people. And, we need to know, what has the government done? Why was the lockdown announced at just 3.5 hours notice, which created the entire crisis of the migrant workers? What has been done to provide employment for those who went back to their villages? We are really facing humanitarian concerns and problems that we have simply failed, I think, to address properly.
The curtailment of zero hour and question hour is not the only change that is being proposed, Dr. Tharoor. There are some changes being suggested for the parliamentary committees as well. Some reports suggest yours in particular, the Parliamentary Committee on IT, is up for both debate and change, as many BJP members have asked for you to be removed from there. Has this been discussed with you?
No, I was not consulted. I have not been consulted so far, but during my chairmanship of the External Affairs Committee in the previous Parliament, the renewals each year were pretty much automatic, and every chairman, unless they moved on to other responsibilities, served 5 full years. So I am a bit surprised by this, and in particular after a year in which we lost 5 months to COVID. Because of the lockdowns, we were requested not to hold meetings. My appeals to be allowed to hold virtual meetings were rejected by the Speaker and the Rajya Sabha Vice Chairman, and the result essentially the Vice President of the country was the Rajya Sabha Chairman, and the result essentially was that we didn't have even 4 months of sustained work. We've hardly been able to conclude discussion on many important issues and submit reports. So it is truly quite surprising that after such a brief and truncated experience that there would be any desire to change these committees. I think logically what many of us would recommend is that they continue for some time, even if for whatever reason the government and the leadership of Parliament doesn't wish them to continue for the full 5 years. But obviously authority resides with the two presiding officers. I just hope that they will look at this in a large, broad-minded spirit. We cannot surely in our democracy manage to give the world the impression that whenever any issues are deemed sensitive, that they cannot be entrusted to an opposition chairman. That goes against the spirit of the way in which Parliament has conducted committees in the past. For example, the External Affairs Committee, from which I was removed, has always, from the very beginning, been chaired by an opposition MP, until last year when the BJP for the first time put a BJP chair in charge. And the irony is that we had used this to always convey to the world that our differences, our political disagreements stop at the borders, stop at the water's edge, that when it comes to foreign policy, national interest, national security, all parties are united. I notoriously said there is no such thing as a Congress foreign policy and the BJP foreign policy. There is only Indian foreign policy. That was the spirit in which I conducted that committee. And now to see that the government doesn't trust the opposition enough to want to safeguard and protect national interests and send such a signal to the outside world is, in my view, deeply, deeply disappointing. I would say the same for the sensitive issues involving citizens' welfare, data privacy and security, cyber security, internet, social media sites, public information and media. All of the issues that come before my committee are issues that I do care about and that many members of the public care about, and they ought to rise above the political divisions in our party. And I think it'll be a very disappointing sign of lack of bipartisanship in our politics if that were indeed done. But having said that, I would concede that it is very much the prerogative of the presiding officers to decide how they wish to proceed on such matters. All I will say is that I have worked in everything I've ever done, whether at the United Nations or in Indian politics, with integrity and with conscience. And I'm not easily swayed by other, shall we say, less respectable considerations, even political ones. And I would certainly follow the principles that I have stood for all my life in everything I do, including in whatever responsibilities are entrusted to me in our parliament.
Of course, one of those issues under immediate consideration is the controversy around Facebook. Dr. Tharoor, I will not ask you to comment on that because I know investigations are ongoing, but a change in guard in the committee will surely delay those observations and investigations. One final question, sir, and thank you for being... Yeah, please go ahead.
No, any committee inherits the agenda adopted by our committee, but presumably could change their agenda if they wish to. But certainly I want to stress on the record, since there were some allegations made that I had gone beyond my mandate or the rules of the committee, I have not done so. In fact, it's the agenda had been adopted at the beginning of the parliamentary year, unanimously by the committee. I stuck to that agenda. Within the agenda, which witnesses to invite are, first of all, the chairman's prerogative, but subject to the approval of the speaker, only do the invitations go out. So not only was I acting within my own prerogative as chairman, but the invitations to Facebook could not have gone out if the speaker had overruled it. So I'm afraid if that is the grounds on which some have called for my removal, as appears to be the case from their letters, their grounds are wrong. They're simply false.
So putting internet restrictions in Jammu and Kashmir on the agenda was always part of the agenda, Dr. Tharoor. It wasn't something that was inserted later, as seems to be the allegation.
No, but the speaker used his prerogative to deny permission for witnesses from Jammu and Kashmir to be summoned. So the subject remained on the agenda, and had Pranab Dar not passed away and we adjourned out of respect for the president that day, we would have discussed internet shutdowns in Jammu and Kashmir with the Home Ministry representatives, but not with representatives from Jammu and Kashmir. And that is the speaker's prerogative that I don't contest.
I have
But
one.
the issue was not taken off the agenda. The issue remained on the agenda.
Sure. I have one final question, and I appreciate you being so sporting about this situation with bad connectivity, sir. As all of us are witnessing on mainstream media, there is a theater of the absurd playing out with regards to one particular film star and, the life and times around that. It's interesting that in that light, there was an important observation by the Delhi High Court yesterday on reporting a criminal investigation, saying the press cannot convict anyone or insinuate that he or she is guilty or make other unsubstantiated claims. Do you think this is something that we really need to sort of internalize in letter and spirit, not just as media persons, but as viewers who consume this kind of news as well?
I would hope so, Mitali. I was the plaintiff in that Delhi High Court case, so it's improper for me to say more than that. I truly welcome and respect the judge's observations and her judgment. But I will say that the use of television as a weapon of mass distraction, which we have seen all too often in our country, by particularly those playing along with the agenda of those in the government or in national politics who wish to distract the public away from issues that are inconvenient to them, that is truly reprehensible. And I would hope that all of you in the media would wake up to that, number one. And number two, that the informed viewing public, knowing full well that they're being taken for a ride away from the issues that really matter to their own lives and welfare, that they would stop watching such channels. The truth is that this distraction works because if people are focused on their prurient or voyeuristic interest in other people's lives, sexual habits, recreational activities, or that sort of business, then they are not focused on the economy, on COVID, on governmental malfeasance or incompetence, on aggression on the borders, all the issues which actually have more of a direct bearing on their lives become overlooked when they are caught up in worrying about whether somebody committed suicide or was murdered, whether somebody took drugs and who gave him the drugs, and all of the sort of salacious stuff that's going on the issue you mentioned. So to my mind, what ought to be a minor story on the inside pages, or at best fodder for one occasion of gossip rather than daily feeds, has become the predominant issue for certain channels and certain media, and they are claiming to be justified because it's kept their TRPs very high, and their TRPs are high because enough suckers, as it were, have been found to watch them. And that's where we have to point the fingers at ourselves. There was a powerful op-ed recently saying that we have to, viewers have to blame ourselves. We have enabled this. I excuse myself because I don't watch any of this myself, but I do hear about it, read about it, and I think it's shocking that what has happened has been allowed to happen, both by the public and by those in the media who ought to know better and who ought to take their social responsibility as media in a democracy more seriously.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I hope people are listening and it causes change. Dr. Tharoor, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for speaking with me.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.